want you to put yourself in a very specific, a very familiar scenario right now.
Oh, I think we all know where this is going.
Right. So it's 3 p.m. on a Tuesday. You're sitting at the kitchen table, and you are just trying to feed a toddler.
And you're probably exhausted.
Oh, entirely exhausted. Maybe you're thinking about all the emails you haven't answered yet, or that subtle dread of an upcoming performance review, or just the laundry sitting in the basket upstairs.
The endless laundry.
Exactly. So the toddler sitting across from you, they're holding this bright plastic spoon. And suddenly, they hold the spoon out towards you.
Just offering it up.
Yeah, they look at you, they babble something that sounds like, and then they point a very sticky finger directly at the bowl of food.
The classic toddler demand.
So what do you do? Your response in this scenario is probably pure reflex at this point.
You don't even think about it.
Right. You make eye contact, you smile a little bit, and you just say, "Oh, you want food?" And then you gently hand the spoon back.
It takes, what, maybe 3 seconds?
3 seconds, max. You don't think twice about it. But that seemingly insignificant, utterly mundane, everyday spoon exchange, it is actually the single most critical activity for child's brain development in their first 3 years of life.
Yeah, I know it sounds almost like an exaggeration.
It really does.
But when you actually look at the neurological data, that 3-second interaction, it literally carries more weight than, well, virtually any highly structured educational program you could even enroll a toddler in.
Wait, seriously? More than those intensive toddler development classes?
Absolutely. The data is incredibly clear on this.
Okay, well, that is exactly what we are getting into today. We are taking a deep dive into a massive stack of intense academic research, including some translated work from a program called Science-Based Parenting.
It's a fantastic resource.
It really is. And our mission for you today is to decode exactly why your casual attention is biologically more powerful than any expensive premium developmental toy on the market.
And we brought the receipts for this one?
Oh, we definitely did. We're pulling from an incredible array of sources today. We've got foundational data from Harvard University's Center on the Developing Child.
Which is pretty much the gold standard.
Right. We also have a groundbreaking 2019 neuroimaging study from the New York State Psychiatric Institute and Columbia University.
That one is fascinating.
Plus some longitudinal behavioral studies from Science Direct. And of course, the legendary and honestly heavily scrutinized Hart and Risley research on the 30 million word gap.
You really can't talk about language development without touching on that one.
No, you can't. So we are exploring this overarching concept known as serve and return. Okay, let's unpack this. Because if you really think about it, this is essentially finding a biological cheat code for human development.
A cheat code is the perfect way to describe it.
Right, because we are constantly culturally conditioned to look for the most complex, high-tech solutions to give kids an edge.
We want to buy the app or the flashing toy.
Exactly. But the literature is explicitly telling us that the simplest tool we possess, which is literally just our reciprocal attention, is the primary engine of cognitive architecture.
Cognitive architecture is a great term for it, because we are talking about literal physical construction here.
Like actual building blocks in the brain.
Exactly. To understand why that simple spoon exchange at 3 p.m. is so disproportionately powerful, we can't just look at behavioral outcomes.
Right. We can't just look at whether the kid learned a new word.
No, we have to look under the hood. We need to examine the metabolic and, the structural reality of what is actually happening inside a toddler's skull during those first 24 months of life.
Right, because we aren't just talking about a kid learning a polite social grace or figuring out how to get more applesauce from you. We are talking about the physical assembly of the organ itself.
Precisely. So let's start with the sheer biological data coming out of Harvard's Center on the Developing Child.
Okay, lay it on us.
When a baby is born, their brain is incredibly malleable, right? But it's largely an unfinished project.
It's pretty small.
Very small. It's only about a quarter of the size of an adult brain. But in just the first 2 years of life, that brain grows with such terrifying metabolic ferocity that it reaches about 80% of its adult volume.
Wait, 80%? By their second birthday?
By age 2. Yes.
The caloric and biological demand of that is just staggering to think about. I mean, that is an astronomical amount of biological growth in a microscopic window of a human lifespan.
It really is. It is a period of explosive neurogenesis and, more importantly for our discussion, synaptogenesis.
Okay, synaptogenesis. Let's break that down for people who maybe haven't taken biology in a while.
Sure. So during this window, the brain is furiously building synapses, and a synapse is simply the microscopic gap, the literal connection point between two neurons.
Okay, so neurons are the brain cells and synapses are how they talk to each other.
Exactly. Every single time a child experiences something like a sound, a new texture, a drop in temperature, or even just a facial expression, neurons fire.
And when they fire together.
When they fire together, these synapses form, creating a vast, incredibly dense network of pathways.
Like a massive highway system being built overnight.
Yes, and this is the structural foundation for how the brain will eventually learn to process complex logic, how it will control fine motor skills, understand syntactic language, and regulate intense emotional states.
But the crucial catch here, and I think this is where the serve and return concept really anchors itself, is that the brain doesn't just build these specific high-level functional pathways automatically, does it?
No, it absolutely does not.
It's not like a biological clock that just ticks away in the background, indiscriminately wiring the brain up perfectly, regardless of what's happening in the external environment.
And that right there is the dividing line between basic biological survival and complex cognitive development.
The environment matters.
It matters more than almost anything. The genetic blueprint is present at birth, sure. It dictates the general layout of the brain. But the genetic blueprint cannot lay the wiring itself.
It needs raw materials.
The construction crew needs materials. The brain absolutely requires external experiences to act as a catalyst for the synaptic formation.
And what's the best material?
Well, the highest quality, most potent material for this neurobiological construction isn't passive stimulation. It isn't a flashing electronic toy that plays, a synthesized Mozart track.
As much as the toy companies want us to believe it is.
Right. The absolute best catalyst is the dynamic, unpredictable, reciprocal interaction with a human caregiver.
I really want to break down exactly how this mechanism works because serve and return sounds like a nice tennis metaphor, but what does it actually look like neurologically?
The tennis match is actually the perfect conceptual model. So the child serves a bid for connection.
And this serve doesn't have to be a word.
Oh, early on, it almost never is a word. A serve could be the baby just making sudden eye contact with you.
Okay.
It could be babbling, reaching out a hand, pointing at a bird outside the window, throwing a toy on the ground over and over, or even crying because they're uncomfortable. That is the ball coming over the net.
So they're essentially sending out a localized signal saying, hey, I am actively engaging my environment right now. Is the environment going to engage back?
Yes, that's exactly it. And the adult returns the serve by responding.
Right.
So you make a sound back, you mimic their wide-eyed facial expression, you play a quick game of peekaboo, or like in our opening scenario, you acknowledge the spoon, say a few words, and hand it back.
That targeted response is the return volley.
Yes, that is the return.
Okay, so when that return volley connects, when the adult responds appropriately to the child's specific focal point, what is the actual physiological mechanism that occurs in the brain? I mean, how does a simple smile translate into cognitive architecture?
This is where we shift from psychology into cellular biology. When you return that serve, the child experiences a rapid cascade of neurological events.
Okay.
First, their sensory cortices process your voice and your facial expression. Because this interaction is inherently rewarding to a social species, the brain releases specific neurotransmitters.
Like dopamine.
Primarily dopamine, yes, and oxytocin. And these chemicals act essentially as a biological binding agent.
Interesting.
They wash over the exact synapses that just fired during that interaction, physically reinforcing and strengthening that specific neural pathway.
So it's literally like applying super glue to the connection the exact moment it forms.
Precisely. If we look at the neurobiology of learning, there is a fundamental principle known as Hebb's law.
Okay.
It's often summarized as neurons that fire together wire together.
Ah, I've heard that.
Right.
Oh.
So each successful, completed back and forth exchange, each rally, sends an electrical and chemical signal through the child's brain that physically fortifies those connections.
It's building the muscle.
Exactly. It strengthens the networks responsible for language comprehension, for reading complex social cues, and for self-regulation later in life.
You know, this makes me think of an analogy. If you imagine the infant brain as this incredibly dense, wild, completely overgrown forest,
Okay, I like this.
right, there are billions of trees, which are the neurons, but there are no clear roads between them yet. A serve and return interaction is essentially taking a machete and clearing a tiny rough path through that brush.
A very narrow path.
Yeah, the first time you do it, the first time the baby babbles and you smile back, it is just a narrow dirt trail. The signal can get through, but it's slow.
It's a very fragile connection, neurobiologically speaking. It hasn't been optimized yet at all.
Right. But the more times you walk that exact same path, the more rallies you have over that specific type of interaction, the wider and smoother that neural highway becomes.
That's right.
And in the brain, this smoothing process is literal, isn't it? We're talking about something called myelination.
Exactly. Myelination is the process where these frequently used neural pathways are literally coated in a fatty substance called myelin.
Okay, so it acts like insulation.
Myelin acts exactly like the rubber insulation on a copper electrical wire. It prevents the electrical signal from leaking out, and it allows the impulses to travel up to 100 times faster.
100 times faster. So by returning the serve repeatedly, you are essentially taking that dirt path you cleared with the machete, widening it, laying down gravel, and finally paving it with thick, smooth asphalt.
You're building a superhighway.
It becomes a permanent, high-speed neural expressway. But, this raises a much darker biological reality for me.
Recruiting phase.
Yeah. If you never walk that path, if the baby serves and the return never comes, if this neural pruning is as ruthless as the literature suggests, and the brain literally deletes unused pathways, what is the compounding effect of that over, say, the first 3 years?
It's significant.
Are we talking about irreversible damage?
We're certainly talking about profound structural deficits. In neuroscience, this deletion process you mentioned is called synaptic pruning.
Okay.
The brain is an incredibly efficient, energy-conscious organ. It takes a lot of calories to run a brain.
Especially one growing that fast.
Right. So if a pathway isn't being used, if those connection bids are repeatedly sent out into the void and ignored, the brain assumes, well, the environment doesn't require this specific capability.
Wow.
And so it chemically dismantles those synapses to save metabolic energy for other vital functions. If a child spends their first 3 years in an environment completely devoid of serve and return rallies, the literal physical mass of their brain, particularly in areas governing complex thought and emotional regulation, will be demonstrably smaller.
Which is just wild to think about. The human brain is effectively outsourcing its own foundational architectural design to the people standing outside the skull.
It is a profound and honestly uniquely vulnerable evolutionary strategy.
It really is.
If we step back and look at the evolutionary biology of this, it forces us to ask a big question. Why would the human brain, which is arguably the most complex structure in the known universe, leave its own final development so entirely dependent on external human interaction?
I mean, it seems intensely risky. Why not just hardwire the whole system in the womb like a lot of other animals do?
Right, like a horse.
Yeah. A newborn foal drops out of its mother, figures out gravity, and is walking within 30 minutes. A human baby can barely maintain control of its own neck muscles for the first 3 months. We are born astonishingly helpless.
We are amazingly helpless. But the evolutionary trade-off for that helplessness is infinite adaptability.
Ah, adaptability.
A foal's brain is hardwired because a horse basically only needs to know how to be a horse in a field.
Eat grass, run away from wolves.
Exactly. Human beings, however, occupy vastly different ecological, social, and linguistic environments across the globe. By outsourcing the final neurological wiring to the immediate environment, the human brain ensures it perfectly adapts to the specific language, the specific culture, and the specific survival requirements of the family it happens to be born into.
That makes so much sense.
But more profoundly, it proves a philosophical point through hard biology. Humans are fundamentally wired to be social creatures from day one. Our literal neural architecture does not exist independently. It depends entirely on community.
It's an incredible framework. It completely recontextualizes how you view, just a baby cooing at you in the grocery store checkout line.
They're working.
Right. They aren't just making noise to be cute. They're actively searching for the raw materials to build their Wernicke's area.
Exactly.
But, as a consumer of this research, I have to ask for the receipts here. The machete in the forest is a great conceptual model. But how do we definitively know this is actually happening in a live human brain?
It's a fair question.
Because brain development is notoriously difficult to track in real time. Is there hard empirical data that proves a simple game of peekaboo physically alters the structural capability of the brain?
The empirical evidence is robust, and honestly, it has evolved significantly over the last decade thanks to advances in neuroimaging.
Okay, let's hear it.
Let's dig into that 2019 research we mentioned earlier, the one conducted by the New York State Psychiatric Institute in collaboration with Columbia University.
Yes, the Columbia study.
This team set out to measure the actual physical ping pong effect. They didn't just want to know if kids who talked more had better vocabularies down the line.
Right, that's just behavioral.
Exactly. They wanted to see the literal structural architecture of the brain corresponding to conversational turn-taking.
But how do you actually measure that? I mean, you can't exactly put a squirming, screaming 2-year-old into a functional MRI machine and ask them to lie perfectly still for an hour while you observe them playing with their parents.
You're entirely right. Neuroimaging with toddlers is notoriously complex and frustrating. To solve this, researchers typically use a two-pronged approach.
Okay, what's prong one?
First, they use incredibly sophisticated audio recording technology in the natural home environment. It's often referred to as a talk pedometer.
Like a Fitbit for words.
Exactly like that. The most common one is the Lena system. This device is worn by the child in a little vest, and it runs specialized algorithms that filter out background noise, television, radio, and overlapping speech.
Oh.
It meticulously logs the exact number of adult words spoken, the child vocalizations, and, crucially, it tracks the specific conversational turns.
So it tracks the rallies.
It logs the exact serve and return cycles occurring naturally in the home over days or even weeks.
Okay, so they get a massive data set of pure behavioral observation. They have an exact objective count of how many times the ball went over the net and came back. Then what?
Then they bring those same children into the lab for neuroimaging.
And how do they get them to stay still?
Often, this involves scanning the children while they are in natural, unmedicated sleep.
Oh, that's clever.
Yeah, they use specialized MRI protocols that look at both the gray matter, which are the neurons themselves, and the white matter, which are those myelinated highways we discussed earlier.
Right, the paved roads.
Exactly. And they specifically examine the language centers, like Broca's area, which handles speech production, and Wernicke's area, which handles language comprehension.
Okay, the suspense is killing me. When they cross-reference that home audio data from the talk pedometer with the MRI scans, what did they find? Was there a direct correlation?
The results were definitive and highly, highly specific. They found that the sheer number of interactive serve and return cycles directly linearly impacted the structural integrity of the brain.
Linearly?
Yes. The children who engaged in frequent back-and-forth exchanges showed measurably higher activity and stronger, more heavily myelinated connectivity in something called the arcuate fasciculus.
The arcuate fasciculus. What is that?
It's the specific white matter tract that physically connects Broca's and Wernicke's areas.
Oh, so it's the bridge between understanding words and saying words.
Exactly. And that bridge was demonstrably thicker and stronger in those kids compared to the children who experienced fewer interactive exchanges.
That is absolutely fascinating. So it wasn't just a general, vague observation that kids from chatty families are smarter. The physical, structural cables connecting the language centers of their brains were thicker and more robustly insulated because of the back-and-forth interaction.
Yes.
The rallies literally paved the highway.
Exactly. The interactive nature of the experience was the biological fertilizer. But, the data gets even more granular than that, and frankly, it profoundly disrupts some deeply ingrained societal norms.
Oh, I love disrupting a norm. Tell me.
Let's look at the longitudinal study published in Science Direct. Longitudinal studies are the gold standard in developmental psychology because they track the exact same individuals over a significant period of time to see how early variables influence later outcomes.
Right, you track them for years instead of just taking a snapshot.
Correct. In this specific study, they started tracking parent-child pairs when the infants were just 9 months old, and then they rigorously measured the children's cognitive and language outcomes at 18 months and again at 24 months.
Okay, so they are looking at how a specific behavior at 9 months predicts a cognitive ability a year and a half later. What was the specific variable they were trying to isolate?
They were isolating the impact of who is returning the serve.
Who is returning it? Okay.
Because for decades, early childhood research heavily, sometimes almost exclusively, focused on maternal interactions.
Right, it's always about the mom.
The legacy of researchers like John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth created a paradigm where the mother-child bond was viewed as the sole critical axis of early development.
The idea that moms just have this magical instinct that nobody else has.
Right. But this Science Direct study sought to measure both mother-child and father-child serve and return interactions completely independently to see how each contributed to the final cognitive outcome.
Oh, wow. So they're essentially testing the biological validity of the traditional primary caregiver assumption.
Precisely. And a massive paradigm-shifting takeaway from this study is that both mother-child and father-child serve and return interactions at 9 months are equally, strongly, and independently linked to the child's later language skills.
Wait, equally.
Equally.
That directly challenges decades of developmental pressure placed solely on mothers. If the brain is truly caregiver agnostic, it means there is no biological magic touch that mothers possess over fathers when it comes to neurodevelopment.
The infant brain does not care about the gender of the caregiver. It does not care about societal expectations, cultural norms, or traditional familial roles.
It just wants the dopamine.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
The developing neurons are entirely blind to all of that social context. The brain only cares about the quality, the responsiveness, and the frequency of the neural rally.
This is incredibly empowering information because historically, so much of the crushing anxiety of early childhood development has been placed squarely on the shoulders of mothers.
The mom guilt is a very real phenomenon.
It's massive. There is a pervasive cultural myth that moms just naturally possess an innate, unlearnable instinct for brain building, and that fathers or grandparents or extended caregivers are somehow secondary or just supplementary, like they're the backup team.
This data completely dismantles that myth. It proves, on a neurological level, that brain building is an all-hands-on-deck household responsibility.
Right.
If a father or a grandfather or a daycare worker is returning the serve with attunement and warmth, the child's brain is constructing that exact same high-quality neural highway. The biological mechanism is completely identical.
It completely democratizes child development. It shifts that intense, overwhelming pressure off a single individual. It is scientific proof that every single engaged adult in a child's orbit is an active, vital architect of their mind.
You don't need a special maternal instinct. You just need to be present and willing to play the game.
But, this also has massive structural implications for society, doesn't it? Well, if the science definitively tells us that multiple caregivers engaging in serve and return is optimal for a child's brain, it completely reframes how we should be viewing things like paternity leave.
Oh, it absolutely does. If a society's goal is to optimize the cognitive development of the next generation, the science clearly indicates that fathers and secondary caregivers must be afforded the time, space, and societal support to be physically present for those crucial early interactions.
It's not just a nice-to-have vacation.
No, depriving an infant of an engaged father figure isn't just a matter of family bonding. It is actively depriving the infant of critical neurological building blocks during a rapidly closing window of development.
That is a very powerful reframing of the whole conversation. Now, I want to take this a step further and look at what happens when this process breaks down at scale.
Okay.
We've established that the brain requires these interactive rallies to build white matter tracks. We know that a lack of interaction results in synaptic pruning. So what happens when we look at entire demographics where these rallies might be compromised due to systemic stressors?
To understand the macro-level impact of disrupted serve and return cycles, we have to examine one of the most famous, influential, and honestly heavily debated concepts in modern early childhood psychology.
And what's that?
The 30 million word gap.
Ah, yes. This is the Hart and Risley study from the mid-90s, right? I feel like this specific study has been cited in every parenting book and educational policy paper for the last 30 years.
It has. It's ubiquitous. In 1995, researchers Betty Hart and Todd Risley published a truly groundbreaking, incredibly labor-intensive study.
What were they looking for?
They wanted to understand why certain children seem so much better prepared for kindergarten than others. So they spent over 2 years conducting intense observational research on 42 families across various socioeconomic backgrounds.
42 families.
Right. And they physically went into the homes and recorded 1 full hour of every single word spoken in the household each month from the time the child was 7 months old until they were 3 years old.
Even with just 42 families, an hour of tape a month over nearly 3 years is an astonishing amount of raw data to transcribe and code by hand in the 90s.
It was a monumental effort.
So what was their ultimate conclusion from all those tapes?
By extrapolating the data from those monthly snapshot recordings, they discovered a staggering disparity. They calculated that by age 4, children from higher socioeconomic backgrounds, families they categorized as professional, had heard roughly 30 million more words directed at them than children from disadvantaged families or families receiving welfare assistance.
30 million words.
30 million.
Even as an extrapolation, that is a deficit that is almost impossible to wrap your head around for a 4-year-old. It's an insurmountable linguistic mountain.
It was a bombshell finding at the time. It profoundly shaped educational policy, early intervention programs, and parenting advice for decades.
I can imagine.
The overarching conclusion seemed tragically straightforward. Children in poverty hear fewer words, therefore they develop smaller vocabularies, their cognitive development is stunted, and they struggle more in school. The narrative became entirely about volume.
Right, the logical leap there is brutal. If a kid is starting their first day of kindergarten, 30 million words behind the starting line, the race is almost over before it begins.
Exactly.
But you mentioned that this concept is heavily debated now. How does modern research view the 30 million word gap today? Because 30 years is a long time in developmental science.
It is, and modern research, specifically over the last decade, has deeply reevaluated and heavily nuanced the original Hart and Risley premise.
Okay.
First, there are newer prospective studies, like a very significant one from Australia mentioned in our sources, that provide critical timeline context. They found that these developmental disparities don't just suddenly materialize out of nowhere when a child takes a kindergarten readiness test at age 5.
Right.
The divergence emerges much, much earlier. They could see measurable disparities in developmental trajectories between 12 to 18 months of age.
Wow. So before the child is even capable of stringing 2 coherent words together, the developmental trajectory is already visibly splitting.
Exactly. The foundation is laid incredibly early. However, and this is a massive paradigm shift in the field, neuroscientists and linguists realized that the initial public reaction to the 30 million word gap was fundamentally flawed.
How so?
The reaction in the 90s was essentially a panic. It was, these kids are word-starved. We need to bomb them with vocabulary immediately.
Right. The instinct was just to crank up the volume. Turn on the talk radio in the crib. Sit them in front of a screen, playing an endless high-speed loop of dictionary definitions and flashcards so they can hit their 30 million quota for the week.
Precisely. The assumption was that sheer quantity of language was the silver bullet. But if we connect this back to our neurobiology discussion about synapses and myelination, we know the brain doesn't just passively absorb data like a sponge.
Right, it's not a hard drive.
It's an active prediction machine. Here is where the critical nuance from modern research, including brilliant work from institutions like MIT, comes in.
What do they find?
The solution to cognitive development is not simply the volume of words. It is the interactive nature of the conversation.
Quality of interaction over the sheer quantity of vocabulary.
Exactly. Speaking incessantly into a child's ear without waiting for a response, offering no return to their serve, or serving at them constantly without giving them the space to hit the ball back, that does not build the language centers effectively.
It's just noise to them.
Yes. The brain needs the rally. It is the turn-taking, the actual back-and-forth rhythm of human conversation that drives the structural growth in Broca's area.
I can vividly picture the difference here. Imagine a well-meaning parent who read the terrifying headline about the 30 million word gap.
And they're panicked.
Right. They are terrified. Their child is falling behind. They're driving their toddler to the grocery store, and they decide they need to cram in some severe vocabulary building on the commute. So they deliver an absolute, uninterrupted monologue from the front seat.
Just talking at the mirror?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Look at the big green deciduous trees. Look at the fast red automotive vehicles. Look at the expansive blue sky. See the canine? The canine is ambulating. The canine has brown fur.
A wall of sound.
And the kid in the back seat is just staring blankly out the window, totally overwhelmed, maybe trying to process a fraction of it, but mostly just zoning out because they aren't part of the exchange.
It is a barrage of complex vocabulary, a high word count, but absolutely zero interaction. It completely lacks the biological trigger of a serve and return.
Right. Now let's contrast that with a parent who is naturally a bit quieter. Maybe they haven't read a single parenting book in their life. They are driving, And the toddler in the back points a chubby finger at the window and says, "Bah." The parent looks in the rearview mirror, follows the child's gaze, waits a beat and says, "Yeah, you see the dog. It's a big dog."
That's a perfect return.
And then the parent intentionally waits again. The toddler smiles, feels validated, and says, "Duh." And the parent smiles back and says, "That's right, dog."
That second scenario, despite containing a fraction of the total words and utilizing incredibly basic, simple vocabulary, is vastly superior for the child's brain development.
Really?
Yes. The parent in the second scenario is actively participating in synaptogenesis.
So if I can synthesize this for our listeners, it is basically the difference between listening to a lecture or an audiobook versus having a dynamic, real-life conversation with a friend over coffee.
That's it, exactly.
Passive listening is a fantastic way to absorb general information as an adult with a fully developed prefrontal cortex, but it doesn't build the foundational linguistic pathways in a rapidly developing infant brain the way active sparring does. You have to get in the ring and spar.
That is an excellent analogy. The structural integrity of the brain's language center is not built by the raw data of the words themselves. It is built in the pauses.
In the pauses.
Yes, it is built in the negative space between the words where the child realizes they are an active, recognized participant in an exchange of ideas. That realization is what triggers the dopamine and oxytocin release that locks the synapse into place.
Wow. Okay, I want to intentionally shift the mood here for a second because we need to talk about the collateral damage of this information.
I know where you're going with this.
If I am a parent or a primary caregiver tuning into this deep dive right now, I might be feeling a suffocating level of anxiety.
I can completely understand why. The stakes we have described today are incredibly high.
Seriously. We just established that every single babble, every pointed finger, every time a kid drops a spoon or makes a strange face, it is a crucial neurobiologically vital serve.
Right.
And we've said that if they miss it, the neural highway gets aggressively pruned away. The logical conclusion for a stressed parent is terrifying.
The pressure is immense.
If I'm trying to cook dinner, balance a budget, answer a work email, and keep a household running, do I have to be completely on 24 hours a day?
No, absolutely not.
Am I permanently ruining my child's cognitive architecture? If I'm just desperately overstimulated, I need 5 minutes of absolute silence, and I intentionally ignore the 400th time they point at the family cat.
This is exactly why we need to transition into what I consider the most vital part of this entire research,
Yeah.
the 50% rule.
The 50% rule, okay.
Because the scenario you are describing is intense, anxiety-driven parental burnout, and the biological science completely invalidates the need for it.
Oh, thank goodness. Please, elaborate on this. Save us from the guilt.
This might be the most profoundly relieving piece of data in our entire discussion today. Rigorous developmental research confirms that parents and caregivers do not need to be perfectly attuned.
We don't have to catch every ball.
In fact, striving for 100% responsiveness is not only statistically impossible, it is actually developmentally detrimental.
Wait, really? Detrimental?
Yes. The data shows that responding to a child's serve just about 50% of the time is entirely sufficient to help the child develop robust neural pathways and a deep, lifelong sense of secure attachment.
Wait, half the time. I only need a 50% batting average to build a healthy, highly functional human brain.
Yes, just half the time. What's fascinating here is the psychology of what developmental experts call the good enough parent.
Good enough parent.
Right. This connects back to foundational theories from psychoanalysts like Donald Winnicott in the 1950s, which have since been backed up by modern neurobiology. If a parent is perfectly attuned 100% of the time, immediately anticipating every need and returning every single serve the microsecond it occurs, the child actually misses out on learning vital psychological and neurological coping skills.
Because they never experience a delay. They never experience frustration or a sense of separate agency. They just think the world is this immediate, magical extension of their own desires.
Exactly. Let's look at the biology of a missed serve. Suppose you are cooking. The baby babbles a serve at you, and you honestly just don't hear them. Or you're too focused on draining boiling pasta to turn around.
Safety first.
Right. There is a momentary rupture in the connection. Because their bid was ignored, the child experiences a tiny, manageable spike in cortisol.
A stress hormone.
Yes. They feel a microdose of frustration. But then, a few minutes later, you turn around, you sit down, You make eye contact, you smile, and you re-engage. You repair the rupture.
And what happens during that repair?
The repair triggers a massive release of oxytocin, which rapidly downregulates the cortisol.
It flushes the stress away.
Exactly. Over time, cycling through these minor ruptures and successful repairs is exactly what physically builds the child's stress response system, the HPA axis in the brain.
So the 50% rule isn't just a merciful concession to exhausted parents. It's an active mechanism for teaching the child something fundamental about human relationships and emotional regulation.
It teaches profound resilience. It teaches the natural, messy ebb and flow of human interaction. The child learns deeply and implicitly at a cellular level that a temporary lapse in attention does not mean the relationship is permanently broken.
Wow.
It teaches them that the world is a fundamentally safe and reliable place, even if it doesn't respond to their demands instantaneously every single time.
I'm going to push back on this slightly, just to ensure I am defining the boundaries correctly for anyone listening.
Of course.
So you're telling me I can literally ignore my kid half the time, purposefully tune them out, and science says it's totally fine.
Let's be very precise about the tone and intent here, because intent matters immensely.
Right.
It is absolutely not about willful neglect, chronic ignoring, or hostility. If a caregiver is sitting on the couch, entirely dissociated, scrolling through their phone for 3 hours, while a child desperately escalates their attempts to get attention, crying, acting out, eventually giving up, that is a chronic lack of attunement.
That's a different story entirely.
Yes. That causes toxic stress, which floods the brain with cortisol and actively destroys synapses. The 50% rule is entirely different. It is about giving yourself profound grace when the friction of normal life naturally gets in the way.
It's for the everyday chaos.
Exactly. It's for the caregiver who feels crushing guilt because they had to finish a critical email while the toddler was trying to show them a wooden block for the 10th time. It means that as long as the baseline of your relationship is warm, safe, and responsive half the time, the missed moments don't derail development. The repairs carry much more weight than the ruptures.
That is incredibly freeing. And honestly, looking at it logically, this scientific permission to be imperfect might actually make caregivers significantly better at the 50% of interactions they do catch.
How do you mean?
Well, think about the cognitive load on the adult. If you are constantly terrified of missing a serve, you are operating in a state of hypervigilance.
That's exhausting.
You are acting out of an exhausting, anxiety-driven obligation. You're tense. The interaction becomes performative rather than genuine.
You're just checking boxes.
Exactly. But if you deeply understand that 50% is essentially a solid A in the world of neurobiology, when you do have the capacity to sit down and play, you can actually relax.
You can be present.
You can act out of genuine joy, curiosity, and engagement rather than panic. And the child's brain is absolutely going to pick up on the authenticity of that dopamine release.
That is a brilliant synthesis. The neurochemical quality of the return volley is vastly improved when the player isn't terrified of losing the entire match.
All right, so we have established the biological imperative. We know the neurobiology of synapses and myelin. We understand the critical difference between conversational quantity and interactive quality. And we have the scientific grace to fail 50% of the time without ruining our kids.
We've covered a lot of ground.
So let's get intensely practical now. Let's look at the actual playbook.
Yeah.
How do we execute a high-quality serve and return when we are in that 50% window of engagement?
The Harvard Center on the Developing Child has distilled this complex neuroscience into a phenomenal, highly practical playbook.
I love a good playbook.
They break the perfect serve and return interaction down into 5 distinct actionable components. And the beauty of this is that it requires absolutely zero equipment. You can start doing this the minute we finish speaking today.
Perfect. But instead of just listing them out like a textbook, let's contextualize this. Let's map these 5 components onto a messy, real-world scenario.
Okay, set the scene.
Let's say I am dragging my toddler through the produce section of the grocery store. I'm trying to figure out what to make for dinner. The cart has a squeaky wheel that's driving me crazy, and my kid is sitting in the basket. How does the playbook start?
The very first component is simply noticing the serve.
Noticing the serve. Okay.
This requires a conscious shift in your own attention. You have to temporarily pull your focus away from the dinner menu in your head and look for the child's focus.
Scan the environment.
In the grocery store, maybe your toddler suddenly stops kicking their legs, their eyes go wide, and they point intensely at a massive display of bright yellow lemons.
Okay, they see the lemons.
They might let out a little gas or a babble. That specific point of focus, that physical gesture, is the ball coming over the net. You cannot return the serve if you don't first see it.
Okay, so step one is just awareness. I see them looking at the lemons. I see the serve. Now I have to return it. What makes a good return in the middle of a crowded grocery store?
A good return is simply a warm, validating response. You acknowledge what they are focusing on. Again, this doesn't require a master's degree in early childhood education.
Thank goodness.
It can be incredibly subtle. You stop the squeaky cart for a second, you follow their pointing finger, you look at the lemons too, you make eye contact with your child, and you smile.
Just a shared moment.
You might nod your head. Sincerity and shared attention are what count here, not a perfectly crafted educational monologue.
I am validating their interest. I am telling their brain, yes, I see what you see, and it is worth paying attention to. Which naturally leads into the third component, which sounds like where the actual vocabulary building happens.
Exactly. The third component is giving it a name.
Giving it a name.
Once you share the focus, you verbally label it for them. While they are still pointing at the display, you say, yes, look at all those lemons. They are so yellow.
And that's it.
That's it. But that is the precise millisecond the language centers are being wired. You are providing the exact auditory label, the sound lemon, for the visual and conceptual object they are currently obsessing over.
You are striking while the iron is completely hot. Their Wernicke's area is primed to learn about that specific yellow object right in that exact moment, and you are just casually handing them the perfectly labeled file folder.
Perfectly stated. Now, the fourth component is where the actual ping pong rally happens, and it is where most adults actually stumble.
Okay, what is it?
The fourth component is taking turns, waiting, and following their lead.
Waiting?
Once you say, yes, those are lemons, you have to stop talking. You have to wait.
This is the crucial pause we discussed earlier. The negative space.
Yes. You must give the child's processing seed time to catch up. A toddler's brain takes longer to formulate a response than an adult's.
That makes sense.
Do not rush to fill the silence. Do not immediately push the cart forward, and do not immediately change the subject to the apples next door. You wait.
Just hold the space.
You give them the space to babble back, to smile, to kick their feet in excitement. You follow their pacing. If they want to look at the lemons for another 5 seconds, you look at the lemons for another 5 seconds.
Which brings us to the final component. How does the rally end? Do we just stare at the lemons until the store closes?
The fifth component is recognizing endings and beginnings. You have to realize when the rally is over.
How do you know?
A toddler has a notoriously limited attention span. They will signal very clearly when their brain has processed enough of that specific interaction. They might drop their pointing hand, look away from the lemons, look down at their shoes, or simply start babbling about something else entirely.
They drop the ping pong paddle and wander off the court.
Right. And your job is to let them. Let them disengage.
Don't force it.
Exactly. Do not force them to keep playing the game. Do not say, no, look back at the lemons. Say lemon. Say it for mommy. Let their brain rest. A completely new rally will naturally begin 3 minutes later when you reach the cereal aisle.
I want to highlight something really beautiful from the translated script we reviewed for this deep dive.
Oh, from science-based parenting.
Yeah. The original researchers used a specific, wonderful phrase to describe the overarching philosophy behind these 5 steps. When translated to English, it essentially means lingering lovingly.
Lingering lovingly, that is gorgeous.
Isn't it? It's a profound paradigm shift. It completely pushes back against the modern, hyper-scheduled, aggressively optimized style of parenting we see everywhere today.
It implies that high-quality cognitive development doesn't require hours of dedicated, structured, stressful time. It doesn't require flashcards.
No forced curriculum.
It requires 100% presence in very short, unhurried, mundane bursts.
Precisely. You do not need to block out a 45-minute cognitive development time on your calendar. You weave these micro-interactions into the existing fabric of your day.
Let's talk about those mundane daily routines, because the source material provides some fantastic examples of how to do this when you are just trying to survive the day.
Give me some examples.
Take bath time, You have a captive audience. The child is sitting in the tub, splashing water. You don't need a lesson plan. You just linger lovingly. When they slap the water, you say, "Whoa, big splash. The water is warm." You wait for them to giggle and you smile back.
It's just normal life.
Or diaper changes. Diaper changes are arguably the ultimate opportunity for this.
Because they can't escape.
Right. It's a logistical task you have to do half a dozen times a day anyway. The child is lying flat directly in front of you. Use that 90-second window for intense, focused eye contact. Make silly faces, wait for them to coo, and respond. You are literally building brain mass over a dirty diaper.
Or car rides. We talked about the overwhelming monologue versus the dialogue earlier. You are strapped in, they are strapped in. Just chat about the view outside. See the red light, now it's green. Go, cars, go.
Exactly.
And even if the child is 6 months old and entirely nonverbal, hearing this back and forth cadence, the rhythmic rise and fall of your pitch as you ask a question and leave a pause for their coo, it's invaluable.
It provides the rhythmic, structural foundation of all future complex communication. They are learning the rules of conversation long before they know any of the vocabulary.
This entire framework has to be incredibly liberating for anyone listening who feels suffocated by the pressure and the sheer expense of parenting in the modern era.
It should take a huge weight off their shoulders.
You don't need to completely upend your life. You don't need to feel guilty about working. And you don't need to drain your bank account to optimize your child's brain. You just use the diaper change. You just use the produce aisle.
The science essentially strips away the commercialization of early childhood development. It reveals that these small, screen-free, phone-free windows of 5 to 10 minutes a day are the true, irreplaceable building blocks of a human mind. Everything else is secondary.
Which brings us to the end of our journey today. Let's comprehensively recap exactly what we've unpacked. We started with a bowl of food and a plastic spoon, and we ended up dissecting myelination, synaptic pruning, and the physical architecture of the human brain.
It's been quite a ride.
It has, but the core takeaway is biologically undeniable. The most powerful mechanism for a child's brain development in their first 3 years isn't a premium toy, it's not an app, and it's not an expensive class. It is the simple, everyday serve and return ping pong of reciprocal human interaction.
And to make sure you can operationalize this immediately, let's reiterate 3 concrete action items for you to try today. First, challenge yourself to spend just 5 to 10 minutes of completely screen-free, phone-free time observing your child. Do not direct their play. Do not try to teach them anything. Just watch and see what serves they are naturally throwing your way.
Just sit on the sidelines and wait for the ball to come over the net.
Exactly. Second, use your mundane daily routines. Whether it's eating, bathing, or just walking to the mailbox, casually narrate what is happening without overthinking it. Just describe what you see and give your child a deliberate pause to chime in, even if their chime in is just a sigh, a babble, or a smile.
Love that. And the third.
And third, please give yourself some grace. Remember the 50% rule and the biology of rupture and repair. If you are distracted, if you miss a serve, if you just cannot muster the emotional energy for a game of peekaboo right now, science says you are still doing a spectacular job. Resilience is built in those gaps.
It is about the consistency of the relationship over time, not absolute perfection in every single moment.
Exactly right.
Now, before we let you go, a quick tease for next time. The source material hinted at a fascinating follow-up topic that we are going to dive into. We'll be exploring how to further develop a child's language skills as they grow older again, completely bypassing expensive flashcards.
It's a great follow-up.
We will dig even deeper into why the specific syntactic rhythm and the complexity of a conversation matter infinitely more than just the raw volume of words they're exposed to.
It shifts the focus entirely from rote vocabulary memorization to complex cognitive mapping. It's fascinating stuff.
But to close out today, we want to leave you with a final, somewhat provocative thought to chew on. We spent a lot of time talking about how the human brain absolutely requires this specific, active, two-way human interaction to build its neural highways and insulate its white matter tracks.
Which raises a profoundly important and perhaps unsettling neurobiological question about our modern environment.
Yeah, it does.
If the foundational architecture of the human brain relies so heavily on this active, reciprocal serve and return with a physical, responsive human being, what does our increasing societal reliance on passive, one-way screens mean for the neurological wiring of future generations?
I mean, when a tablet serves up an endless, algorithmically optimized stream of flashing lights and noises, but fundamentally cannot read this subtle, momentary eye contact of a baby. It cannot detect their micro-expressions, and it cannot return a customized, emotionally resonant smile. What happens to the forest path? What happens to the machete?
Are we, as a society, accidentally dropping the ball on the most important biological rally of our lives?
It's a very heavy question, and it's something to seriously mull over the next time you see a toddler handed a phone to keep him quiet in a restaurant. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep observing the world around you, keep asking those big structural questions, and most importantly, keep learning. See you next time.